So we're continuing on in Romans, and we're going to Romans 1, chapter 1, verse 18, and we'll go through to verse 20 this morning. At this point, Paul has completed a brief summary of his gospel to the Romans in verses 16 and 17. This is the approach they would normally use in those days, particularly in Greek culture, to present your arguments. You would first give a summary, and then you would move towards the detail of what your argument is. So we will see that Paul, in giving this gospel, he wants to give a gospel that he's so proud of, and he's unashamed of it. But what does he do? He gives the bad news first. And this is something we must never forget, that there is good news. But for people to appreciate the good news, they need to know the bad news. And sometimes people are pussyfooting around, afraid to tell people what the bad news is before they proceed to the good news. So what Paul does is in verse 18, he's going to begin to explain why an unrighteous humanity needs the news. Define the need. And he's going to show that man's in a perpetual state of moral and ethical degradation. Morals, just to remind you again, it's easy to forget, morals is about your customs and your principles, and ethics is about applying them individually in the way that you live your life. So you understand certain morals, and then your ethics is how do you handle those morals in your society, your family, and so on. And of course the degradation that Paul's aware of is a degradation of ruin, of confusion, of humiliation that he is seeing and we are seeing today. The timing of Romans to discuss today for us in our particular context, in our culture, is so relevant because we're facing the exact things that Paul was facing, with essentially in Rome being the headquarters of what would be a world power of the day, a world power, and an evil world power. So all men since Adam, of course, they stand condemned under sin. They cannot conquer the power of sin. They cannot live to God's standard of righteous perfection. And so this introduces the idea that you need to hold on, that Paul speaks about a lot, is God's wrath. So God's wrath rests upon the unsaved man. And he also rests upon the sinning believer too, this wrath. It can do. But certainly man needs God's righteousness to be provided for him. This is the key to the unsaved, to the unregenerate. And as this can only be provided, as we know in this room, there's no one who doesn't know this, but obviously it's provided as a free gift by God's grace through Jesus Christ and by the faith of those who put their faith upon Jesus Christ to obtain forgiveness of sin, to obtain the free gift of eternal life, and to obtain the power of the Holy Spirit to live subsequently in an overcoming of sin. So Paul is about to explain how all unregenerate men, now if you study it carefully, you see that this passage is mainly addressed to pagan, Gentile unbelievers. But it also includes Jews, the religious, the atheist, the self-righteous, the shameless sinner. All of them stand condemned. And so this passage applies certainly principally to unregenerate, or what we would call loosely unsaved people. It applies to them whether they're Jew or Gentile, and moral or not moral, and so on. And so they stand condemned, and they must experience God's wrath. Why? Because of their sin, because of the problem, the fundamental problem. We're born with a propensity towards sin, and everyone sins as soon as they understand what you can't do. They start to do these things from childhood onwards. And when you become of moral accountability, you choose sin every time in some way, whether that is a thought, whether that is a word, whether that is an action. And what do we measure against? Not the guy next door, that I'm better than him or I'm better than the other people in my street. We're talking about being better as in better with God. Perfection. Are you perfection? Because if not, you have bad news. You need to realize that you don't have God's righteousness, the only righteousness that is acceptable in heaven. So what we're going to note is that I'm going to use a term which is appropriate to get you on board with what I'm saying, and he's talking about a present wrath. Now, a lot of people reading their Bible, they go wrath, hell, and so on. And actually, if you do, it's worth doing a Bible study on the word wrath, right? Old Testament and New. And begin to distinguish on the wrath, the use of the word wrath. Now, that's for another thing. But what I want to say is that what Paul is saying in the book of Romans, without question, is he's warning both unbelievers with the consequences of hell if they ignore it, but he's also talking about a wrath which is addressing to believers. Remember, his letter is to believers. And he's talking about a present wrath. Now, there's a present wrath today that's available for believers, and there is a future wrath. I'm going to show you this. There is also a future wrath. Where's that future wrath? That is sitting in the tribulation. And if you study the use of wrath carefully, you'll see that there are two areas for believers to focus on wrath: the present wrath and the future wrath. And there are scriptures which clarify this concept. So verse 1:18 then says, Paul kicks off with, he's just been talking about the gospel. Now he comes back and he says, well, we got a problem. Let's talk about the problem first. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against, underline this word, all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So the word for in that sentence, for, it's actually referring back to the righteousness of God is revealed, which was in verse 17. So there was a righteousness of God revealed, and now he's talking about the wrath of God is revealed. Yeah, there's a righteousness of God, and that's in the gospel, but there is also a wrath of God that is revealed from God. And this is what he's doing to bring in, don't think this is all happiness. You need to be aware of the present wrath of God. And so as it's present tense, righteousness is being revealed, then so also, present tense again, the wrath of God is being revealed. God lifts his protection, and what he does is, as we've said, he allows sin to run its course deeper. And unless people repent, it tends towards, all the time as he's pulling back, it tends towards getting worse, especially when you deny God. We'll talk about that later. So his present wrath is illustrated in 3 verses that we'll look at later, not today, but in these 3 verses you get the concept being given to you clearly. God gave them over. God gave them over. God gave them over. What did he give them over to? Verse 24, to impurity. Verse 26, degrading passions. Verse 28, to a depraved mind, which is the worst of all, because your mind's going, and if that's going out of line, you need a miracle to pull you back from the insanity towards what you're leading yourself. So that word for then is connecting back to this righteousness of God revealed, and he's saying, yep, but there's a wrath of God that is also being revealed. So this wrath of God, I was tempted to do a sermon and not move past wrath of God and really do that, but I think I'll reserve it for Bible studies. So I'm staying high level, but I do need to communicate a few things about this wrath of God. The original Greek word for wrath was orge, and it means anger and strong displeasure from God. When speaking of wrath in the New Testament, God is usually the focus. To the best of my knowledge, there's one instance of Christ with wrath, and one instance of Satan with wrath. But all the others, it's God and the wrath. God is in the wrath. So mostly, if not always, it seems to refer to God's present strong displeasure against sinful actions by men now, or then, or in time, temporal, on earth. That's the wrath that's happening. Remember that conceptually, just as a thought, remember that what placates God's wrath? Well, people repenting, but he gives them the judgment. So Israel are moved to Babylon, and there's a judgment. The judgment's coming, boy. They can moan all they want. They're going to get the judgment from the wrath. Then the wrath is placated appropriately. The lesson is learned, hopefully, if it's with believers, and they then come and they get an opportunity to re-establish everything, because God is not desiring that any perish unnecessarily or suffer unnecessarily. He wants them to grow on. But the wrath is delivered at a point. And so that wrath, apart from luring you further into your sin, can then manifest itself in physical ways which are pretty unpleasant, which could be sickness, addiction, so on and so forth. So there's this wrath that can come either on an individual, and the wrath can come corporately. So if you're sitting, or your friend's sitting in a church that you clearly know is clear teachings that are unbiblical, those people need to come out. They need to be made in love, aware, and know that if they stay, the wrath of God is going to manifest. They must come free of it, or they will get worse in this delusion. And this is the thing, right? You see what I'm saying? So, mostly, it seems to refer to these displeasure against sinful actions with men in earth time. And so his present wrath today applies whether it is individual sin or corporate sin. So when we look back at Israel, we see many examples of corporate wrath put on God's people. A concept you need to understand, if you think and meditate and study it properly, is that God's wrath is very open to his own people. Because he loves them, and he's got to bring them back. He disciplines those he loves. He's not going to leave them without that. So because in today's thinking, we know God is love. God is love. God is love. And we're ignoring the reality of everything that's being taught. No, he is love. He is. But in love, he will exercise wrath if needed to help. And if he doesn't exercise that wrath, it can be a wrath that you feel and you notice, or a wrath that's worse, really, where he just pulls back and he lets you do whatever you want to do. He will have given you signals and things to prevent, and then you carry on, and then he will pull back and he will say, you're going to have to learn the hard way. Go and do it. So today, you look at who's got the wrath of God? Well, the Palestinians. It's sad. They've got these leaders teaching them to teach their children, generation after generation, hate the Jews, kill the Jews, hate the Jews, kill the Jews. Everything belongs to us, nothing belongs to them, lie after lie, and then the kids go to the next kids and the next kid. Then you look at their land and go, well, how happy are they? And it's rubble. It's a disaster, total disaster, except in areas where the leaders have got money, and there are parts of Palestine that are very fancy, as good as any Western Lani place. But with the average people who are going through this crippling hatred, it's a wrath that is upon them that they need to break free of. And so they are suffering from that. You could consider ISIS. You could consider, there's so many instances where people are caught up horrendously and they're being let back. God is pulling back and using others to exercise his wrath. It doesn't mean he's approving. He doesn't approve of the Babylonians. He doesn't approve of the Assyrians. He doesn't approve of ISIS. But he will use but in the sense of allowing the manifestations of these things to come forward for his purposes. Correct? Go to the tribulation, book of tribulation. How many people are going to die? Well, you can do the maths, it's there. It tells you how many are going to die from this, how many are going to die from that. It's about half the population of the world. So if the New World Order haven't already depopulated us, if we're still populated like we are, we're talking obviously billions of people are going to die. Billions. It's a very serious, very, very serious thing. So we said it's either here or now, or the future tribulation period. So I've given you some verses to show you the future. Romans 2:5 says this, same book, Romans. Because of your stubbornness and unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself in the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. Romans 2:8. To those who are selfishly ambitious and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, wrath and indignation. These are terms, these are very careful, precise terms. They're looking ahead to a particular time. 1 Thessalonians 1:10. You must wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from dead. That is Jesus. Why? He rescues us from the wrath to come. So there is a wrath to come, and there is the current wrath as well. So in Romans, God's wrath is both present and future, and it's a giving over of man to ever increasing depths of a persistent sin. And it can be expressed in various ways, but always it is a response in anger and displeasure. God takes no pleasure in sin. Now, just for the record, there are some conservative scholars that question whether God's wrath should ever be understood as eternal judgment, and particularly in the book of Romans. And again, it does introduce, when aside from the texts and the various usages of it, there's a conceptual challenge that you need to think through. If God exercises wrath, when he's exercised his wrath, he's satisfied. He's done his wrath. So when he puts someone in hell, is God sitting in wrath for all eternity on the people in hell? I don't think so. Now, what he will have done is exercised his wrath, and then that will discontinue, and the judgment, whatever it is in the lake of fire and eternal suffering of some sort, the separation, that separation, once he's exercised it, I can't personally, from a theological point of view, I can't easily see that he's sitting and fuming for all eternity about what those people did. He will have exercised the judgment, and then if you look at all the places where he exercises wrath, and then he stops. The wrath has been executed, he's done. It would be like a parent with a child. You don't just pick up a slipper and hit your child for something they did. You are going to maybe give some corporal punishment in love, but then when it's finished, you don't carry on. That's not God, and that's not a Christian. There should be love, forgiveness, hugging, and that's how God is. And so I just want to point out a few things to provoke you. But I'm not selling this as a confirmed fact. What I am saying is it could be a very interesting, detailed study on the word wrath. God's wrath particularly. So the next phrase in that sentence then, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. So two words are used, ungodliness and unrighteousness. They have two slightly different Greek words. I'll give you the words on the paper. And there's a likelihood, but I don't want to go so strong as to say this is absolutely definite, but I think if you look at the usages of these Greek words, it's likely that what Paul is saying when he says ungodliness, he's thinking of the first 4 commandments with God. And when he uses the other word, the other Greek word, he's looking at the last 6 commandments, which are directed with man. So when you're sinning, you can be sinning directly with the things that God is saying to you, but you can also, God has told you the other commandments, but they're affecting people. You're affecting your fellow man. Love God and love man. So it's possible that those two words in Paul's mind, he's separating the ungodliness to God and the unrighteousness towards man, under the commandments of God, of course. Both are violations, definitely. Whatever they mean, they're both describing violations against God and his will by words and deeds. And of course, even though Paul is writing this about all the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, he's not saying everybody is equal. So the vices that Paul will list later on, not today, when he gets into real nitty-gritty, they will be equally found. You know, they won't all be equally found on all unbelievers. One. Two, you look for them to see, are they unbelievers as well? Because anyone who thinks, because I'm a believer, I can do what the unbelievers are doing and I'm going to not get any wrath because I'm a believer, you are making a big mistake. And that is why, even as a believer, you should healthily retain a fear of God, a healthy fear of God. In other words, what we should have, and I'm preaching to myself as much as anybody in this room, what we should have is, when we know we've sinned, we should have a healthy fear of the fact that we've gone against our God in a way that we know. It will help us to correct ourselves, and that is, I believe, the way God would want us to be. It's not a fear where we're paralyzed and we think we can never fix it with God and we can't confess our sin and get back into fellowship. Of course we can. But to just treat it flippantly is not the best way to think about our sin. The best way to think about our sin is with fear and reverence to a most holy God. So I think we can take that from today. So all ungodliness and unrighteousness, they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. That's another phrase in the sentence. They suppress the truth. Now, Paul doesn't see humanity's sin problems are due to passive ignorance. And so no, he is saying humanity has chosen to actively suppress. The Greek word there is implying to stifle, to deny, to detain and hinder God's truth. And so Richard Dawkins and many atheists and agnostics who talk against the Bible, people who are talking against the truth of God's word, God isn't seeing that they are just an accidental process. He's seeing them as they are suppressing his truth, not by ignorance. They're doing it with deliberately. Where? From the heart. So I debate with people by post, and I may have never met them. And so we're going backwards and forwards on something. But the funny thing is, what I've found for myself and them is your heart, your inner emotions, your inner being can guide your arguments and make your actual things that you present seem logical, but they're coming from a heart that is anti. They're not real. They're expressing something inside rather than the logic of the argument. So how this is revealed is when somebody might say something, let's say it's an Islamist, and they are trying to convince me, for example, that they believe the Bible. And then I show them some verses which show, do you agree with these verses? And they go, no. And I say, well, they are from the Bible. And they will go, well, the Jews corrupted the text. So then I go to the New Testament, same thing, corrupted. This is showing that, an inconsistency that's obvious. Either you don't believe the Bible and you need to stop it, but he won't. Why? Because Muhammad believed the scriptures that he was hearing. They don't want to go against Muhammad. So they don't want to go against Muhammad, but when they look at the stuff, they're actually going against Muhammad because they're disagreeing with what is written. Out of interest, there's a verse in the Quran that tells a Muslim, if you don't understand the Bible, you must go to a Christian. Do you know that? He actually gives them the advice in the Quran. Anyway, if you want later on offline, I can find the verse and show you. But they're told to go and talk to us. But you see that when you do and you point it out, they begin behaviours that show it's not logical, they're really just going through a process, they have no interest in finding truth. Suppressed. So what is this truth that's being suppressed? We go to the next verse, Romans 1:19. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. Now Paul, what's his primary focus here? Is that God can be, because he's dealing with Greeks and Romans, many of whom don't believe in God, or if they do, they believe in many gods because it's just useful, it's just practical. If we dominate this country, take their gods, put it in a room, make them pleased, tell them we'll pat it on the head along with all the other gods, keep them happy, and they mustn't say their God is more strong than any other god. If they do, we'll kill them all. We'll tell them that as well. If you mess with us, we'll kill a lot of you, we'll slaughter you. And so you say, thank you very much. You take your little god, you give it over to the Romans, they put it in, and they've got another god. And they show that all these gods are more powerful than your God. That's why we beat you in war. And so now, welcome to the family. And you've got 50 gods to decide which one you fancy, or the one you brought. There was only one exception in all the empire to this, and that was the Jews. Only the Jews were allowed to stay with one God that had no form, had no idol. And the reason was practical. The Romans knew these are very good, hard-working people. They're actually superior intelligent than many others. They know how to govern, etc., etc. They are way better than any other nation when you look at the nation as a whole, which is true today, of course. And so they decided, look, we can wipe them all out. We could wipe them all out, but we're just kicking ourselves. Let's just make an exception for the Jews. And so they were allowed to have the temple with their one true God, the only people in the entire Roman Empire, the Jews. But obviously for the Romans, for the unbelievers, that which is known about God, what Paul's saying, it's evident within them, for God made it evident to them. In what way? Through the universal God conscience, through inbuilt morality, through the fact that all cultures worship a God. Why do they do this? And this is found throughout all recorded human history. The fact is that man is not, despite everything you hear rammed on you with the propaganda, man is not naturally atheistic. He's never been. He's not naturally agnostic, which means he's not sure, he doesn't really know. And he's certainly not totally devoid and born totally devoid of moral knowledge in any culture. Every culture knows what stealing is and it's not good, and so on and so forth. Why? Why isn't stealing good? If evolution is the strong over the weak, which it is, that's what it is at the end of the day, and I'm stronger than you, why can't I just steal from you? I'll do anything I want. I'll take your wife, I'll spread my DNA with her, we'll be strong. We're evolution. We're the fittest. Now Richard Dawkins would have a heart attack if that's how you dealt with him and his family and his wife, because you were stronger than him. But he proclaims this. This is what he proclaims. But unfortunately, we're going back to what I told you. These people make things from their heart that are ludicrous. They're absolutely ludicrous. Because they're professors, we sit there and say, Professor so-and-so said. And 4 other professors agree with him. It must be right. Well, Paul's saying, no way. No, they cannot be. Romans 2:14-15 says this, for when Gentiles, who do not have the law from God, do instinctively the things of the law, these, not having the law, are a law to themselves. In that they show the work of the law from God written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness, and their thoughts alternatively accusing or defending themselves. In other words, we're born with some God stuff by the Creator, conscience, morality, an awareness and a need of worship. If we don't worship God, you just look at where are the people spending their time, you find their worship. It could be gym, It could be business 24/7, money. Just look where people are spending all their time and effort. There's their idol. And remember for yourself, is this God thing part-time for you? I mean, it doesn't mean you've got to be full-time. You've got to earn a living. You've got to do stuff. But is it just a hobby? So, unfortunately, secular humanists, satanically inspired, have spent 3 generations to today trying to pollute and destroy every vestige of biblical Christianity and godly truth from Western culture. What have they attacked? Gender. How can you say you're a man? You might be a woman. If you feel like a woman, you can be a woman. Marriage. You don't have to be a man and a woman like God said. I know God invented marriage, but we are reinventing marriage. It can be 2 men and a woman, 3 men and a woman and a dog, a woman and a tree, a woman and... You understand what I'm saying? They're now looking at making it legal you can marry your robot. Family? Well, you don't want family. If you aggravate the government, we'll take your children from you and we'll accuse you of abusers. We want you in the state school and you've decided to homeschool. And this is Sweden, supposed to be the land of freedom and liberalism. And they come in and arrest you and take your kids away. No. Fertility, we're being, if none of you are noticing, but the fertility of men is dropping in the Western world. If you haven't noticed that, you're not noticing anything. And of course, abortion is killing those that make it as well. So we're killing millions that actually make it to fertility and pregnancy. And at the same time, we're imbibing chemicals, fluoride and other things in the water and the food, the shampoos and so on that we're going with. And they are gradually eroding our ability to reproduce as we would have been were we not being hit by chemicals. So, fatherhood, every TV program, if it's got some story, it's a woman on her own, the husband's left. The husband, if he comes in, he looks a bit of an idiot. The woman's strong, the man's weak. We're feminizing men. I think I got a bit of laughter from you when I told you a truth. That men in America are applying for the army and they have to throw a grenade, I think 40 or 50 meters, and they show you a video of these men. I kid you not one of them knew how to stand and throw something that a kid would learn out in the park. No idea. Strength? None. They're being feminized. You've got to watch this with your children. Everything is moving to feminize the men, to neutralize the men. No alpha male. You want what they call beta male. You want a beta males. Why? Because they're submissive. They'll do what the government want. The ones they're worried about, alpha males. The ones who'll stand up. I kid you not on these things, by the way. You do your own homework. Motherhood, childhood, stealing the innocence of children. I mean, how can you possibly justify sending LGBT transgender people to kids 3 and 4 years old, dressed up in their garb, and teaching the kids, this is good. You should be like us. And you might think you're Johnny, but tomorrow you might think you're Mary. We'll be with you. We agree with you, and so on and so forth. This is the degradation that's happening. Conscience is disappearing. People have got no conscience. Our mind, the church is being eroded. Righteousness of law, morals. The infiltrated liberal church has greatly helped this by bringing it into the church, unfortunately. So what my point is here is that even though we're not naturally along these lines, there's been a war. There's a war going on, and it's moving us away from God, and every foundational part of society they are breaking down. Right now, they're working with artificial intelligence. Why? To produce the second Adam. who will be better than the first Adam and will prove that God never produced an optimal Adam. I'm not joking. That is the goal. The philosophers are with it, the scientists are with it, the atheists are with it, the money's behind it, and they're spending everything they can to produce so that they can showcase at some point a man-machine. Obviously we've already got the heart and all the other pacemakers and other stuff. This will be just postulated as another part of the improved man. So what does God say? He says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, and who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Isaiah 5:20. Gosh, does this verse apply today? So today, these humanists are unknowingly, what are they doing actually? They're preparing the way for the lawless one, because we're getting more and more lawless with the legal systems. I mean, the judgments, the lawyers, we're losing the morality, we're losing what would be back in the past. You know that when I was young, how seriously we took, even as a child, if you shook your hands on something. Do you know that? It was considered binding, culturally binding. Two businessmen didn't need to write reams of paper, they just shook on it. And if the person reneged on it, his reputation would be cut to shreds within the community and everywhere that he worked. Today, I pick up my set of pills from the pharmacist and I open up the box and there's a bit of paper. I pull the paper out. It's long. It's getting longer and longer and longer and longer. What's it saying? I can hardly read it. I need to get my glasses. Oh, it's telling me I'm not responsible if this happens to me after I've taken these tablets. Do you think this and this might possibly be happening occasionally? Oh, hell yeah, you need to do the stats on that as well. But if you create a pill and you stood on the corner in Belito and said, I have a pill I've invented for something, you're being taken off the street before you can blink. But they can do it and kill hundreds every month. People are dying from these tablets and things. Yep. So they're preparing the way. The evil is building, the lawlessness is building, the lying is building, the power is building, the globalism, breaking down nation states and so on. It's all happening. So God's years, the 7 years of global wrath, the tribulation for global sins is coming. It'll be legal. It will be the sins of the globe. If the globe decides to attack Israel, if the globe decides to abort babies, America's up to 60 million now since they said, that abortion was okay. 60 million they've slaughtered. That's just America. No. 2 Thessalonians 2:8-12 says it. Then the lawless one will be revealed. He's coming, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth, and in accord, and bring an end to by the appearance of his coming. That is the one whose coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all power, signs, false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence. That's his present wrath. He's sending a deluded influence. That's an example of the present wrath of God on people that are going against him. Why? So that they will believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged, who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness. Verse 20, Romans 1:20. These verses are on the front of your bulletin, remember. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen. This is Paul speaking. Being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. So this is talking of people that we would view as sort of primitive. I mean, we are so advanced, they are fairly primitive. But Paul is saying they are without excuse. So we're being told by our culture that we've learned that of course there's no God. Of course there was no creator. That's what we're told today. It is the most ludicrous, pathetic set of lies foisted through National Geographic, History Channel, school system, university systems. It is a total sack of garbage. That's how strong I'm saying it. It's not kidding. The cumulative evidence for a creator has never been greater. More than the people Paul's saying they're not they have no excuse. For example, the law of biogenesis. This is a law, a scientific law. Life comes from life. Not if you're evolution, it's going to come from some rocks. It's going to come from non-life to life. Well, it's going against the law of biogenesis. It's an established law. There's never been seen anything that's ever been able to contravene that. You can't manufacture it. You can't do it. It's the law of information. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Dr. Werner Gitt, for example, is a major force in defining the laws, scientific laws of information. Well, one of the lines of the laws is under no circumstance ever can you obtain information from anything other than a mind. There has to be, for information, always a root source of a mind. So if I gave you a laptop and you looked at the laptop, you could think the laptop's giving you the information, but really the laptop was designed by somebody else who applied their mind to give you the laptop that gives you the impression the laptop is giving you information. There's no instance, ever. This is a law of science, and there is no exception. It's never been broken, and nobody can argue with it because there's no example. It's a law of our reality. Any information that you receive is coming from a mind, if it's information. I'm not talking about throwing Scrabble pieces on the ground and it spelled the word cat and you go, well, look, there you are. I'm talking about the cat sat on the mat and he went and played with Joey, whatever. I'm talking about real information that's flowing. You're never going to get that information from matter. Every observable evolutionary adaptation results from a loss of DNA. We're told that your DNA is making us all better. Every bit of evidence is the DNA is getting worse. If you want to see an example of it, a good example would be the lovely little, poor little poodle. A poodle is the biggest waste of time as a dog that you could ever think of. It has more diseases, more hassles, more aggravations. If you put it out in the wild, it would last about 5 minutes. It would be chop suey. The only reason we've got poodles is because people love them, nurture them and keep them, and then breed them and give them to somebody else. Right? If you let a poodle out in the wild, it'd be gone in no time. It'd be swallowed up by other dogs. But can a poodle become a Great Dane? Not a chance. Why? It's lost the information for long legs. It's lost the information for blah, 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 blah. Why they're so sick is because they're damaged. Their DNA has been lost to create this little poodle, including their defences against many diseases and that. It's loss of DNA. So you take a Labrador and you breed it with something small. The dog's going to come out maybe halfway. Then you look at the ones that have come out and there's the smallest one. So you take the smallest one and you breed that with another small one. They're both missing the long leg information. Now they start producing little dogs. Can you get the sausage dog to suddenly have long legs? It's gone. It's never going to happen. Not with a poodle, not with a sausage dog. And if you breed them to, let's say, long hair, you'll never be able to breed that dog with other dogs and get rid of the fundamental things that they've locked in because you've been breeding it into them. The other information, what dog would have the ability to be either long or short? We'd have to go back to the source. Where do the dogs come from? A wolf. They come from wolves. We go and check the DNA of the wolf. The wolf's got the ability to have long hair, short hair, big, tall. He's still got it. But as we breed in and we inbreed the dogs, they begin losing information as we specialise them. It's like flowers. You can take certain flowers and root them and breed them, and then you produce this certain flower. And you keep doing that with a flower. That flower's not going to change from what you just bred it to be. Why? Because it's lost the information. It's lost the flexibility. You see what I'm getting at? Hope you do understand this. Because it's critical. That means that DNA cannot possibly be getting better. There's no example of it ever getting better. In all the millions of people and all the DNA and all the history and looking at everything in the animal kingdom and everything, there's no evidence ever of anything except adaptation. And that adaptation is a loss of information. So you take the birds that are on Galapagos Island with old Charlie Darwin, and he sees they've got strong beaks, certain type of beak. Yeah, they've adapted, they had the ability to have that beak, and because the weather was such that they had to have hard beaks to crack the nuts. The ones that had the hard beaks, they all survived. The ones that had the ability to be soft beak, hard beak, they've died. We're only left with ones who can have hard beaks. Can the hard beak bird now have a soft beak back? No, he can't. Do you understand? He's lost the information. Okay. I give you this free. But what I'm going to do is I'll take the software off of it. So now you've got a piece of hardware. I've worked in information technology for 35 years in every level, from the nuts and bolts to strategic management. I give you this piece of hardware with no software. You put it in your room and you wait for the software to appear. You wait for that hardware to make some software. You'll wait the rest of eternity. Hardware can't create software. I can put a piece of paper with nothing on it. I've got an ink bottle there, I've got a pencil over there, and there's no human being, and I leave and I wait to see for information to come on the paper. It's not going to happen. You understand? Hardware, the hardware side, the hardware on that piece of paper is ink. But the reason you've got something you can read is because a mind put the ink on the paper according to a coding system, language. If you were to just apply the hardware with the hardware, you take a bottle of ink and chuck it on the paper and wait for something of information to come from it. Nothing's going to happen, right? You're just going to get a blob. You are hardware and software. You've got the most intricate software system that has ever been discovered by anyone. Infinitely more complex than Bill Gates and Microsoft Windows and everything. You've got the upgrade of the upgrades. Each of us, in our DNA, in every single cell in our body. I've got a pack of cards here. Cards in church. Oh my gosh, we're going to get banned. So I sequence these cards. Clubs in sequence. Diamonds, sequence. Hearts and spades. Then I give them to you and I say, shuffle them 3 times. So now they're out of sequence. If I wanted to use design, I could ask a 7-year-old child who is old enough to realise the sequence, just pick them and put them back in order. He will take, if he's got average intelligence, I've done it, it'll probably take him about 4 minutes. He figures out what you want, he says, oh, I got it, and he goes and he picks them and he puts them all back in and then he gives me the pack back. It's in the exact same sequence. But how long do you think it would take you if you didn't do that and you tried to do it by charts? I can tell you. I've actually, on the notes you'll get the exact number, but I'll tell you what it is roughly. The odds are you'll have one chance, each time you shuffle, one chance of 1 billion, trillion, 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 trillion. In other words, what I'm telling you is if you shuffle these cards for yourself, you go home, pick up a pack and shuffle them. No one in world history has ever got that pack that you've just done. I can guarantee you it. No one. Your shuffle will be unique. Well, try and see. So the odds are calculated, they're very easy. You've got 52 cards, so you've got 52 chances of getting the ace of clubs. So let's say you got that, you've left with 51 cards. You've now got 51 chances of getting the two of clubs. You got that. Now you've got 49 chances the next one, and so on. When you multiply all those chances up, it's billions times trillions, 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 and trillions. So what does it mean? Well, it means I would happily bet with you everything I own for 5 cents that you can't do that. And I'll sit there all day long, you just keep doing that, and I'll end up with everything you own and you'll have nothing of mine. Because of the odds. What are the odds of me going in 3 chances of hitting your PIN code at the bank? How many digits is that? 4, maybe 5. Maybe 10,000 to 1. The bank's so confident you'll never hit that by chance, they allow you to have a PIN code with 5 digits in it, with 3 chances. We're talking something here, this isn't 3 digits. This is millions. The issue here is millions to 1. And you've got to hit it first time. No. What it sort of means is, if I gave you a pack of cards and 1 trillion other people, and you all had packs of cards, then I thought, look, that's not fair, so I'm going to have 1 trillion Earths, and every Earth is going to have 1 trillion people on it, and they can all have packs of cards. And you can all test this individually, one at a time. And as you're doing it, if anyone's picking up duplicates, because we've got to the point where now we're definitely duplicating, we'll stop. So, million planets, 1 trillion planets, 1 trillion people shuffling these cards, waiting to get that thing. The entire universe will burn out before you have any hope of duplicating that. Now, why have I said that? That's because that's nothing. That is nothing to the odds of getting a living cell by chance. I'll just give you one bit of data. I could go on all day on it. NASA employed Dr. Harold Moravitz. NASA, they're not a Christian organisation, right? The National American Space Agency, looking for life in space. They inquired for him to do research as a physicist to estimate the odds that they could produce a living bacteria, the simplest form of life, by chance. And he could manipulate chemicals, and he could try and find the soup that would enable it to happen. He was allowed to do that. He could try and find, if I mix this and this and this and that temperature and I do this and that. Using all his knowledge as a physicist, he could optimize the possibility that it could happen, but then he had to say what the odds were against it happening. At the end of this, he came up with, you have 1 chance under ideal natural conditions, 1 chance in 10 with 100 trillion zeros behind the 10. By the way, the cards, you're looking at roughly 10 with 64 zeros behind it. That's a huge number. Now, this other one isn't 64 zeros, it's 100 trillion zeros. I mean, it's mind-blowing. Okay, what does that mean? It means there's a creator. It means there's a creator. This stuff never happened by chance. They can waffle, they can write their papers, and often if you read them, you go on the internet, you can read some of these scholars and it looks so fancy and the words are so long and they use jargon you don't understand, and they go, therefore, it needn't be by chance. It's ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And so no. Then you've got another problem, the law of causation. This is another law. If I drop that, something caused it. If I go to a snooker table and hit a ball and it goes around and it clicks on another ball, everything that's moving and jolting is having a cause. right? Every effect has a cause. That is a universal law. It's non-disputed. Okay, so there was a sort of a Big Bang, call it what you will. What caused it? Well, the science will tell you it came from nothing. So nothing caused it. Okay, so where in science have you ever seen something from nothing? Well, never, but that's what happened. But nothing isn't a cause. No, God caused. God caused. How could that be? What caused God then? Oh, no. Careful. No, God is the uncaused cause. You see, everything that has a beginning has a cause. Like this universe. It began, it has a cause. Who caused the beginning of the universe? Or what caused the beginning of the universe? But with God, the Bible's telling us he's eternal, he's uncaused, he's not created by anything. He is the only uncaused cause. Do you know the problem if you chuck God away? You can go, well, I've got a theory, and there was another cause. Then I go, well, what caused that? And you go, well, I've got another theory, and this caused that. And you just keep going on for the rest of your life, because you're never going to stop. Because you've got to get down to the primeval, uncaused cause. We call that God. In the beginning, God created. So what does that mean? Well, that means if it's true, then there is a supernatural cause. And if there's a supernatural cause, and we look at what we see in the sky, this is what even a kid should understand, really, with a bit of guidance. Then the thing that created it is more powerful than the thing you're looking in the skies. More powerful than the sun, more powerful than the cosmos, more powerful than the entirety of the heavens. Yeah, it's a cause. It's got to be more powerful than what's being caused. Intelligence? Well, it's got to be a supernatural intelligence to get all this to hang together with laws, uniformity, predictability scientifically, and so on you could go. So you begin to see when you're looking at the heavens and you think about it, you're seeing this uncaused cause that is not material. That's agreeing with the atheist, by the way. No, there was. God created from nothing. But it wasn't nothing creating, God created from nothing. You understand the difference? He's sovereign. If somebody did that, then he's sovereign, and he's got a purpose for the people. Of course he has. It's in his word. We saw it in his living word. We saw it in his written word. And so he then speaks to us, right, through a Bible. That's the biggest proof of all. Everything I've just told you is proof. Scientific, proper proof, can't be refuted. But of course the Bible is the greatest proof of all, because it's got the prophecies. God challenges you. He is the only one who can tell the end from the beginning. So read the Bible and find where he's telling you the end from the beginning and see if it happened. Did God say Israel would come back into the land? Yes. And so on. You can go on and on and on. Did he say Jesus would come at a certain time? Yes. And is that time gone by and it's impossible to be there anymore? Yes. It's very specific through the prophet Daniel. He tied it down, some say to the day, certainly to the year of when Christ would come and where he was born and blah, blah, blah. We could go on and on. So the prophecies, and then of course what else? Well, the resurrection. You say, well, how can that be any proof? Because of the evidence. The evidence. So you want to use science? Okay, Mr. Historian. You're a historian who looks at who killed who in the courtroom over there, and you gather the facts and you've got the evidence is what. Read the Bible, look at the evidence and tell us what happened. Did that guy rise from the dead or not? He would have to conclude, yes, he did. And not only that, there are people outside the Bible giving the evidence that it's true. So there are unbelieving Jews who said, yes, he rose from the dead, but it was by Satan. And there were Romans and others that put down on the record, Josephus and others, who were talking about this guy that rose from the dead, and so on. So Israel, of course, the prophecies and the coming back of Israel is the greatest miracle staring us in the face today. The expansion of the church, when Jesus said, that nothing will come against the church. He's on a dirt road. He's got 100 followers maybe? And now there's billions of people. Or you take Abraham. His name will be great. How many thousand years ago was it said Abraham's name would be great? Thousands of years ago. Is Abraham's name great? Well, there's all of Islam, all of Judaism, and all of Christianity, and they all revere and know Abraham. And he would bless the nations. As he blessed the nations. Yeah, well, we got the seed of Christ, and we got all the Jewish inventions. I love the fact that so many people are cursing the Jews while they're using all their implements. Because, of course, if we took away all their inventions, I wouldn't have this computer here. They're responsible for the first chips. And so on we could go. So, what I'm saying to you is, it is understood by what is made. We have more evidence than could possibly be available to people of that time. So modern man, he keeps avoiding the creation reality in the face of refuting evidence, and therefore the verse goes on to the phrase, they are without excuse. Why? Because why really? Why does Dawkins and everybody else, why do they really, and some of them will admit it, why really will they absolutely never, ever, ever allow that God could have done this? Well, because they don't want anybody telling them what to do morally. And some of them are open about it. And they'll tell you straight out. Huxley, to his credit, was just straight up about it. I don't care if there's a God. I'm never going to admit there's a God. I'm going to argue against him because I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And that is humanism. And that is what we've got in our culture now. We've got very clever men who've plotted for over 150 years to put humanism and kick out Christianity. And that's what's been happening. And that's why our TV looks like it does, why our society looks the mess it does, why the schools are the mess it is, and so on, because these people are winning. Why? Because we've moved away from the God that is evident, the God that they're denying. They want to sin. They have faith in themselves. But they'll be held responsible because the wrath of God is coming already, and it will be coming again when they meet him one day in judgment. They're without excuse before God. So to wrap up then, with verse 18, what are we looking at there? Paul's going to start telling us why an unrighteous humanity needs the gospel. Because everybody unregenerate is condemned. He's warning about this present wrath. It falls on everybody who is unregenerate sinners. That wrath is also coming in a tribulation. And that wrath is available even to believers who are unrepentant of their sin. What is the wrath? It's a giving over of a person or a corporate entity to greater sin. What sins? Impurity, degrading passions, depraved mind. Those sins of man are not due to passive ignorance, not in God's eyes. God doesn't believe in atheists. Sin manifests itself in two primary ways according to Paul: ungodliness, sins particularly relating to man and God, and unrighteousness, man versus man, going against the way God said man should love and cooperate with each other. Verses 19 and 20, what were they telling us? They said man is suppressing the truth about their Creator despite evidences, conscience, need of spirituality and worship. As science itself is coming to the table on this over and over again now. The philosophical side, the probabilities of it, everything is pointing. Information side is pointing. There is a God, a mind, a designer, a creator. And of course then we have the Bible, and we have Israel and the church and historical events prophesied in the Bible. Our Western secular humanist culture is aggressively anti-God and anti-Christian. They're only afraid of one religion, Christianity. Why? Because it makes sense. They don't care about the other. They're not worried about Hinduism or anything else. They know that many of the other religions, they're spiritual, they serve a bit of a purpose, but they've got no intellectual threat to them. They're not threatening them with morality and sins and accountability to one true God. Not the way Christianity is. And so what are they also doing? We know from verses 19 and 20, and looking at what they're doing, they're also today preparing the way for the Antichrist, the lawless one. And we know again from those verses, they are without excuse. They're without excuse before God because they're feigning their ignorance of him. It's like the guy who says to you, I've got fairies at the bottom of my garden. And you go, come and show me. So you go to the bottom of the garden, there's no fairies. He says, no, they're on leave. They're away. So, okay, that's fine. When are they back? About 3 weeks. You go back 3 weeks later. Let's go have a look at the fairies. Yeah, come on, let's go and look. Oh, there's no fairies. Yeah, I think they had an accident on the way back. And so on it will go. And this is the literal way that you are finding intellectuals, PhDs, are arguing with each other, making up these stupid stories, and they just invent one excuse after another why you never find the fairy at the end of the garden. And just because they're PhDs, we think, oh, that's very scientific. But it's rubbish. It's absolute baloney. There are no fairies at the end of the garden. There is no evolution that happened by chaos, randomly, without a creator. It's absolute fairy tale rubbish. And they know it. Many of them, they know it. But they're never going to admit it. Why? Because they want to do what they want to do. And they don't want God telling them what to do.